The first major reading that we will do this semester is the Anglo-Saxon epic poem Beowulf. This introduction should help you better understand the text. Let's begin with some background information. Like Caedmon's hymn, Beowulf is written in the Old English alliterative style. In its original Old English, the poem had the alliteration and caesura that we would expect in Old English literature. Look at Haney's translation. What do you see here, or what do you hear? There with shield chiefs and scourge of many tribes, a wrecker of mead benches, rampaging among foes. This terror of the hall troops had come far. A foundling to start with, he would flourish later on, as his powers waxed and his worth was proved. These are lines 4 through 8 of Haney's translation. So you can see that we have the S alliterating in the first line, the W, it's an R sound, wrecker and rampaging, terror and troops, foundling and flourish, waxed and worth. So Haney is copying this alliterative style of the original text. So this is one of the things that I really like about his translation because it follows that pattern all the way through. And, what a job that must have been to do, and I give him all credit for that. There are many, many translations of Beowulf available, but this is by far my favorite because it was translated by a poet rather than a linguist. Nothing against linguists, but I just think that the poetic form of this is so much better. Seamus Heaney was a modern-day poet who grew up in Northern Ireland and taught at Harvard University before he died in 2013. Because he was fluent in Old English, Norton approached him about creating a new translation of Beowulf, one that was not simply a word-for-word linguistic translation, but a poetic translation that would help modern audiences better understand how the poem sounded to its Anglo-Saxon audiences. Haney worked several years on the translation, which was first published in the year 2000. The work received mixed reviews by medieval scholars. Some praised it for bringing the Old English poem to life, while others thought that it strayed too far from the original. The detractors even went so far as to rename this version of the poem Haney Wolf. The first word in the poem is what, which means something along the lines of, "Listen up, I'm going to tell you a story." You might think of it as something like once upon a time. Anyway, Haney translates this word as so, which I think is just perfect. You see, my father-in-law was a great storyteller, and whenever he began a tale, he always started out with that word, so. So, have you heard about the jackrabbit and the boxcar? So, one day a man walked into a bar. But whenever I heard that word so, I knew that a story was coming, and I knew to listen up. So maybe that's one of the reasons that I like this translation so much, because it sounds like a modern-day storyteller. Another feature of Old English poetry is a two-word metaphor that you'll find sprinkled throughout the texts. One is like in lines 9 through 11. In the end, each clan on the outlying coasts beyond the whale road had to yield to him and began to pay tribute. That was one good king. So the words that I have underlined, whale road, that is the two-word metaphor, and it's called a kenning. And a kenning is this two-word metaphor that's designed to make us think about, something else in a different way. So, you think about where whales swim, where they travel. Of course, that would be the sea or the ocean. So instead of saying outlying coast beyond the sea, they just use this kenning to kind of play with words in ways that I think are really quite delightful. One of my favorite kenning is a kenning called boonhoes. And boonhoes literally means bone house or a skeleton. And especially like this kenning because it tells us so much about Anglo-Saxon belief. The Anglo-Saxons believed that the spirit or the soul of a person was like a bird in a cage, and that upon death, when the body corrupted, and you can think about like the rib cage even as this bird cage, and that when the body corrupted or rotted away, that the person's soul was released from the cage, and so the bird flew away. And so I find that that kenning just absolutely delightful. Um, so a third feature that you should watch for while you're reading is a short lesson on proper behavior that's inserted into the text. These are a common feature in Old English poetry. So this particular one says, "And a young man must be prudent like that, giving freely while his father lives, so that afterwards, in age when fighting starts, steadfast companions will stand by him and hold the line. Behavior that's admired is the path to power among people everywhere." And so these little lessons are called gnomic verses. Now they really don't have anything to do with gnomes. The Oxford English Dictionary defines a gnomic verse as a short, pithy statement of a general truth, a proverb, or a maxim. So, in other words, a lesson on how to behave. Another important thing to remember about this text is that we are reading it through multiple translators. The story was first told orally. The events in Beowulf are supposed to have taken place in the 5th century, about the time that the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes came over to England. Remember that there was no written alphabet then, so the story was handed down orally from shope to shope for roughly 300 years. The only surviving written copy of the poem was written by a monk in the 10th century, and there's no way of knowing whether it had ever been written down before that. Well, maybe there would be if another copy turned up, but it hasn't turned up in the centuries between Beowulf and us, so I don't think one's going to pop up at us anytime soon. So, the anonymous monk tries hard to make Beowulf a Christian poem, and he's adding Christian references wherever possible. Pay no attention to the rooster. I know you're saying, what does the rooster have to do with fate versus Christianity? I don't know. When I typed fate in Google, the rooster came up, and I kind of thought he was kind of nice, so I just put him in here. So anyway, you'll notice that the poem refers to fate as often as it does Christ. Beowulf and his people were around a couple of hundred years before the conversion of the Germanic tribes to Christianity. So they most certainly were pagans who had a strong belief in the power of fate to decide outcomes. Watch how fate interacts with Christianity in this tale. Finally, a cautionary note. Just as Old English poetry employs alliteration, so do family names. Usually children's names alliterate with the name of their father. Hrothgar's father, for instance, is half-Dane, so Hrothgar and his brothers all have names that start with H. Unfortunately for us, both major family groups in this poem, the Danes and the Geats, have names that start with H, so everybody's name, it seems like, starts with H. I would suggest that you refer to the Beowulf family tree that you'll find in resources and materials in order to keep everyone straight. Another cautionary note applies to the events in the story. In Haney's book, there are side notes next to the text to help you keep track of what is going on. For some reason, Norton didn't include those notes in its anthology. I have typed them out, I know, gosh, it took me a long time, and provided them in this module. Once again, you'll find them in resources and materials. Students tell me that they are very helpful, so you might want to print them out and use them as you read. So once you have viewed this screencast and the one on Anglo-Saxon society, read the first half of Beowulf, lines 1 through 1650, take the quiz, and then watch the lecture screencast. Thank you.